Story 1. The Bell That Waited in the Rain. Between the sound and the silence, Ren began to notice the small kindness of ordinary things, the handle of a broom fitting into the palm, the patience of stone under rain, the way an old step accepted every foot without asking where the foot had been. These were not separate teachings. They were the same teaching wearing different robes. Everything that did not hurry became his teacher. Sometimes, while sweeping the courtyard, he would remember a harsh word he had spoken years before. In the past, memory would have become a trial. Now, he let it become a bell. It rang once. It showed him where tenderness had been absent. Then it faded. He could bow to the lesson without building a house inside the regret. The villagers also learned that returning did not always feel peaceful at first. Some came to the bell and found sadness waiting. Some found a loneliness they had buried beneath work. Ren told them, when a room is opened after many seasons, dust rises. Do not mistake the dust for failure. It only means fresh air has entered. High in the northern hills, where pine trees leaned over mist like old monks bending over a scripture, there stood a small temple that almost everyone had forgotten. Its roof had once been red, but the rain had darkened it to the color of tea leaves. Its stone steps had once been swept by many hands, but now moss filled the cracks, and tiny white flowers grew where footsteps used to be. At the edge of the temple courtyard hung a bronze bell. It was not a great bell that shook mountains. It was simple, round, and weather-marked, with a small wooden striker resting beside it. Long ago, travelers had stopped there at dusk, invited the bell, bowed, and remembered to breathe before descending into the valley. But for many years, no one came. The bell waited in rain, in wind, in summer heat, in winter silence. It did not complain. It did not ask to be useful. It simply hung beneath the old beam and received the seasons. Below the hill was a village named Yori. The people of Yori were good people, but they had forgotten how to be quiet. They rose before sunrise and measured their days by urgency. The rice growers worried about clouds. The merchants worried about coins. The parents worried about becoming adults. Even the elders, who had less to do, worried that they had done too little or too much. Every home had a lamp burning late into the night, and behind every lamp, a mind moved like a moth. In that village lived a young bellmaker named Ren. His father had made temple bells, hand bells, and small singing bowls, but Ren had inherited more skill than peace. He could hear the flaw inside metal before anyone else could see it. He knew when bronze had been poured too hot, when a rim was too thick, when a note would die too quickly. Because of this, people praised him. And because people praised him, Ren became afraid of every mistake. He worked hard, but the harder he worked, the narrower his life became. If someone admired a bell, he heard only the imperfection. If someone paid him well, he thought of the next customer who might not. If his hands rested, his thoughts did not. At night, lying beneath a thin blanket, he heard imaginary bells ringing from the rafters, each one calling out a different worry. One rainy evening, a widow named Sela came to his workshop, carrying a cracked handbell wrapped in blue cloth. It had belonged to her husband. The bell had rung beside their doorway every morning for 36 years, not to summon anyone, but to remember gratitude before work. After her husband died, Sela rang it alone. Then one morning it slipped from her hand and split at the lip. Now it gave no clear sound, only a dull, broken note. Ren examined it under the lamplight. The crack was deep. He could repair the shape perhaps, but not the old voice. He told her this gently. Sela nodded, yet her eyes lowered as if something inside her had lowered too. She did not beg. She only touched the cloth and said, "Then I must learn to listen differently." Those words followed Ren after she left. Learn to listen differently. He tried to work, but his tools felt heavy. He tried to sleep, but the rain tapped the roof in uneven rhythms. Sometime near midnight, restless and irritated by his own restlessness, he walked out of the village and up the old hill road. He had not planned to visit the abandoned temple. His feet simply followed the path that no one used anymore. By the time he reached the courtyard, his robe was wet and his breath was visible in the cold. The bell hung before him in the mist. Rainwater ran along its sides like clear threads. Ren lifted the old wooden striker. He expected the bell to be dead after so many years of neglect. He expected rust to have swallowed its voice. But when he invited it with one slow strike, the sound opened. It did not ring loudly. It did not announce itself. It moved outward like a circle widening on dark water. The note entered the rain and seemed to make more space inside the rain. It entered Ren's chest, and for the first time in many months, perhaps years, he noticed that he had been holding his breath. He stood there until the sound faded. Then he noticed something strange. Even after the sound was gone, the listening remained. The courtyard was quiet, but not empty. The rain continued. The trees breathed. His own heart beat. The bell had vanished into silence, yet the silence had become alive. Ren sat on the wet stone step. He did not try to meditate. He did not try to become peaceful. He simply sat because the bell had shown him there was nowhere else to go. All night, rain moved through the temple grounds. Sometimes he invited the bell again. Sometimes he listened to the space after the bell. Sometimes he heard his worries begin to speak, and instead of answering them, he let them pass through the wide listening. When dawn came, the mist lifted from the valley. Ren saw Yuri below, small and pale beneath the morning clouds. Smoke rose from rooftops. Lamps went out. People began another day of hurrying. For the first time, Ren did not feel separate from them. Their worry was his worry. Their longing was his longing. Their forgetfulness was his own. He bowed to the bell and walked down the hill. In the morning that followed, Ren began climbing to the old temple before opening his workshop. At first he went alone. He told no one, because a quiet practice is tender in its beginning, like a green shoot that does not yet need witnesses. He would sweep a few leaves from the courtyard, bow to the bell, invite one sound, and listen until the last shimmer dissolved into the trees. The change in him was not dramatic. He did not become a saint. He still misplaced tools. He still felt irritation when customers changed their minds. He still worried when a commission was important. But now, when worry arrived, he recognized its footsteps. He would pause, soften his jaw, and remember the temple bell. He would let one breath ring through the body, not a perfect breath, not a sacred breath, only a breath honestly received. One day, a child carrying water stopped outside his workshop and asked why the air around him seemed less sharp. Ren smiled because he had no impressive answer. He said only, "There is an old bell on the hill. It reminds me that the mind can return." The words traveled the village faster than he expected. By sunset, 3 people had asked about the bell. By the next morning, 7 had followed him up the hill. Ren worried that the quiet would be ruined by company. This, too, became a lesson. He saw that he was attached not only to noise, but also to a private idea of silence. So he bowed inwardly to that attachment and let the others stand beside him. When the bell sounded, some closed their eyes. Some looked embarrassed. One old man cried without knowing why. No one spoke until the sound had faded. From then on, the bell became the village's shared pause. Not everyone came, not everyone understood, but each person who climbed the hill carried something invisible and set it down for a while. A merchant set down the fear of losing money. A mother set down the belief that she had to protect her children from every sorrow. A young man set down the anger he had polished until it looked like strength. Even those who came only once left with a little more room inside themselves. Ren began to teach what the bell had taught him. Though he never called himself a teacher, he would say, "When sound is present, listen. When sound is gone, listen. When joy is present, receive it. When joy is gone, do not chase its shadow. The listening is wider than what appears inside it." This was the teaching of one breath. It entered people slowly, not as an idea to memorize, but as a warmth that spread in the hands after holding a bowl of tea. In the market day that followed, Ren began climbing to the old temple before opening his workshop. At first, he went alone. He told no one because a quiet practice is tender in its beginning, like a green shoot that does not yet need witnesses. He would sweep a few leaves from the courtyard, bow to the bell, invite one sound, and listen until the last shimmer dissolved into the trees. In the harvest week that followed, Ren began climbing to the old temple before opening his workshop. At first, he went alone. He told no one, because a quiet practice is tender in its beginning, like a green shoot that does not yet need witnesses. He would sweep a few leaves from the courtyard, bow to the bell, invite one sound, and listen until the last shimmer dissolved into the trees. In the winter that followed, Ren began climbing to the old temple before opening his workshop. At first, he went alone. He told no one because a quiet practice is tender in its beginning, like a green shoot that does not yet need witnesses. He would sweep a few leaves from the courtyard, bow to the bell, invite one sound, and listen until the last shimmer dissolved into the trees. In the spring that followed, Ren began climbing to the old temple before opening his workshop. At first, he went alone. He told no one, because a quiet practice is tender in its beginning, like a green shoot that does not yet need witnesses. He would sweep a few leaves from the courtyard, bow to the bell, invite one sound, and listen till the last shimmer dissolved into the trees. The most important day came in the season of heavy rain. A storm rolled down from the mountains and struck the valley with such force that the river rose over its banks. Roofs leaped, fields flooded. People ran through the streets carrying baskets, blankets, children, and frightened animals. The village bell near the market cracked in the wind, and the sound of panic filled the alleys. Ren ran with the others, tying doors, lifting sacks of rice, helping elders move to higher ground. All day the rain fell. All day the village shook with effort. Near evening, when the worst had passed but fear remained like cold water in the bones, Sela came to Ren. In her hands, she carried the cracked bell of her husband. It had no clear voice, but she held it as one holds a friend. "The people need to remember their breath," she said. Together they climbed the soaked hill. Others saw them and followed. By the time they reached the abandoned temple, nearly half the village stood in the rain, exhausted, muddy, and silent. Ren lifted the striker, but before he touched the temple bell, Sela raised her broken handbell. Its note was rough, uneven, almost gone. Yet in that moment, no one thought it was ugly. It sounded exactly like a heart that had suffered and still wished to love. Then Ren invited the temple bell. The two sounds met, the cracked small bell and the deep old bell. Grief and steadiness, loss and return. The village listened. The rain listened. Something in everyone loosened. After that night, no one called the upper temple abandoned. They called it the place of returning. The villagers repaired the roof, but not too perfectly. They cleared the steps, but left some moss, because moss, too, was a form of prayer. Ren repaired bells when he could, and when he could not, he taught people how to hear the beauty that remained. Years later, when Ren had become old, a child asked him what the bell meant. Ren looked toward the courtyard, where evening light rested on bronze. After many weeks, the villagers began to understand that the bell was not calling them away from life, but back into it. A mother heard it while mending a torn sleeve and realized she had been holding her breath since morning. A merchant heard it while counting coins and noticed that his hands were tired from wanting more. A boy heard it from the river path and stopped throwing stones at the water, because for one quiet moment the ripples seemed like small teachings moving away from him. Nothing magical happened. The roof still leaked, the field still needed work, people still misunderstood one another. Yet the bell gave them a little space between the event and the reaction. In that space, an insult became only a sound, a worry became only a visitor, a memory became only a shadow passing over the floor. Ren saw this and bowed inwardly to the simple mercy of a pause. One evening when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, Ren climbed to the temple alone and found Sela sitting beneath the bell. She had brought the small repaired handbell in her lap, wrapped again in blue cloth. She told him she no longer needed it to sound as it once had. She had placed it beside her sleeping mat, and when grief woke her in the dark, she touched the cool metal and remembered that love did not disappear just because the form of it had changed. Ren listened without trying to improve her sorrow. That was new for him. In earlier days, he would have reached for advice as quickly as a tool. Now he simply sat beside her, letting the night hold both of them. Far below, one house after another darkened. The village was becoming quiet, not because pain had ended, but because people were learning not to shout over it. He said, "The bell does not give us peace. It only reminds us that peace was not as far away as we thought. We are the ones who leave. We are the ones who return. And each breath is a small path home. So tonight, if your mind has wandered far from itself, do not scold it. Do not drag it back. Simply invite the bell within you. Hear one breath arrive. Hear one breath leave. Notice the space that remains. You do not have to fix the whole village of the mind tonight. You only have to return once, softly, and then, perhaps, once again. Story 2. The Tea Bowl of Enough. Mira discovered that simplicity was not emptiness, but attention without decoration. A plain table could hold more honesty than a crowded one. A modest cup could reveal the fragrance of tea more clearly than porcelain painted for admiration. Slowly, she understood that beauty was not something added to the moment. Beauty was what appeared when the moment was no longer covered by demand. There were days when the old hunger returned. She would see another shop crowded with wealthy guests and feel the sting of comparison. On those days, she did not pretend to be above envy. She washed the bowl of enough slowly and said to herself, "Envy is here. It is thirsty. Let it drink tea, but do not let it choose the road." Her apprentice once asked why the bowl was never locked away for protection. Mira said, "What is protected from use becomes an idol. What serves with humility becomes a teacher. Let the bowl be touched. Let it risk breaking. A life kept safe from all contact may remain unbroken, but it will not become warm." Far to the south of the misty hills, where the road flattened into warm plains, there was a town famous for tea. Its mornings began with steam. Every doorway held the fragrance of roasted leaves, wet clay, and sweet grass after sunrise. Travelers said that if you entered the town with a restless heart, the scent alone would slow your steps. In this town lived a tea seller named Mira. Her shop was small, but people came from distant places because she knew how to prepare tea without hurry. She warmed the bowl before pouring. She rinsed the leaves as if waking a sleeping bird. She never filled a cup to the rim because her grandmother had told her that space was part of the tea. Mira had inherited the shop from her family, and with it, a single plain tea bowl. The bowl was not decorated. It had no glaze that flashed blue or green. It was brown, humble, and slightly uneven. Yet whenever tea rested in it, the surface seemed calmer than in any other bowl. Her grandmother had called it the bowl of enough. When Mira was young, she loved that name. But as the town grew famous, new customers arrived wearing fine robes and carrying clever opinions. They praised rare tea leaves, expensive cups, imported kettles, polished trays. They posted painted signs outside their own shops. The finest tea in 3 provinces. Tea fit for ministers. Tea served in golden porcelain. Mira's shop remained simple. Slowly, a seed of comparison entered her chest. At first it was small. Then it became a vine. She began looking at the bowl of enough with embarrassment. Its rim was imperfect. Its color was dull. It did not look impressive in a rich person's hand. She started saving coins to buy a bowl that would prove her worth. When she finally purchased one, it was white as moonlight, thin as a shell, and painted with cranes flying through silver clouds. Customers admired it, and Mira felt a brief pleasure. But the pleasure did not stay. Soon another shop displayed a bowl with gold around the rim. Then another brought cups from across the sea. The vine of comparison grew tighter. Mira bought more bowls, more trays, more jars. Her shelves filled, but her sleep emptied. She no longer listened to the water. She listened for praise. One afternoon, an old monk entered her shop wearing travel-worn sandals. He carried nothing but a cloth bag and a walking staff. Mira almost apologized for the plainness of her shop, though the shop was no longer plain. The monk looked at the many bowls on the shelves, then at the old brown bowl sitting forgotten near the back. "Please serve me tea in that one," he said. Mira hesitated. "It is only an old family bowl," the monk smiled. "Then it has already learned what new bowls do not know." She rinsed the leaves, warmed the bowl, and poured. Because she felt watched, her hands slowed. Because her hands slowed, her breathing slowed. She heard the small sound of water meeting clay. A forgotten tenderness rose in her. She set the bowl before him. The monk lifted it with both hands. He did not compliment the tea. He did not criticize it. He drank as if drinking was enough. When he finished, he placed the bowl down carefully and said, "This bowl is poor in decoration and rich in silence." Mira lowered her eyes. People no longer want silence. They want beauty. The monk looked around at the polished shelves. Often people say beauty when they mean approval. They say success when they mean safety. They say more when they mean, "Please tell me I am enough." His words were so quiet that Mira nearly missed them. But some teachings do not enter by volume. They enter by finding the exact doorway. After the monk left, Mira could not continue as before. She tried arranging the expensive bowls, but their shine looked suddenly anxious. She tried preparing tea quickly for a wealthy guest, but the water seemed to ask her to wait. She tried counting the day's coins, but each coin sounded like a small question. How much is enough? That evening, when the street emptied and the lamps softened, Mira took down one object after another. She did not throw everything away. The teaching was not against beauty. The teaching was against fear disguised as beauty. She kept what served the tea and removed what served only the hunger to be seen. This was her meeting with the first empty shelf, and it brought the peace of removing what was only purchased from fear. As she worked, she noticed dust floating like tiny lanterns in a bar of afternoon light. In the past, she might have missed it. Her mind would have been busy asking how the shop looked from outside. Now, for a few breaths, she was simply inside her life. The kettle was warm. Her feet were tired. The old bowl sat beside her like a patient friend. Nothing spectacular happened, and this was why it healed her. The next morning, customers noticed the change. The shelves had more space. The sign outside no longer promised the finest tea in any province. It simply said, "Tea prepared with care." Some customers were disappointed. They wanted performance. They wanted rare objects to discuss. They left quickly. Mira bowed to them inwardly and let them go. Other customers stayed. They seemed relieved. By the quiet, Mira began serving tea in the bowl of enough once each day, not to the richest guest, not to the most important, but to whoever looked most unable to rest. Sometimes it was a merchant who had traveled all night. Sometimes a mother with a baby sleeping against her chest. Sometimes a student whose exam had gone poorly. She did not announce a lesson. She simply poured slowly, left space in the bowl, and allowed silence to sit with them. Over time, people began speaking differently in her shop. They did not only discuss price and harvest and weather, they spoke of what they had been carrying. One man confessed that every success made him afraid of losing status. A young woman admitted that praise tired her because it forced her to keep becoming the person others admired. An elder laughed softly and said he had spent 70 years trying to be respected when all he had ever wanted was to be held. Mira listened. The old bowl listened. Steam rose and disappeared. No one was fixed. No one was completed. Yet for a while, each person could feel the simple mercy of not needing to become more before being worthy of rest. That evening, when the street emptied and the lamps softened, Mira took down one object after another. She did not throw everything away. The teaching was not against beauty. The teaching was against fear disguised as beauty. She kept what served the tea and removed what served only the hunger to be seen. This was her meeting with the half-filled cup, and it brought the space that allows sweetness to be tasted. That evening, when the street emptied and the lamps softened, Mira took down one object after another. She did not throw everything away. The teaching was not against beauty. The teaching was against fear disguised as beauty. She kept what served the tea and removed what served only the hunger to be seen. This was her meeting with the broken sign, and it brought the relief of no longer advertising a self. That evening, when the street emptied and the lamps softened, Mira took down one object after another. She did not throw everything away. The teaching was not against beauty. The teaching was against fear disguised as beauty. She kept what served the tea and removed what served only the hunger to be seen. This was her meeting with the quiet customer, and it brought the generosity hidden inside ordinary service. That evening, when the street emptied and the lamps softened, Mira took down one object after another. She did not throw everything away. The teaching was not against beauty. The teaching was against fear, disguised as beauty. She kept what served the tea and removed what served only the hunger to be seen. This was her meeting with the unsold leaves, and it brought the wisdom of not rushing what needs time. One summer, a nobleman arrived with servants, guards, and a face trained never to reveal uncertainty. He had heard of Mira's shop and wanted to test whether its reputation was deserved. He ordered the rarest tea. He asked for the most beautiful bowl. The room became tense. Everyone wanted to see what Mira would do. She prepared the rare tea carefully. Then she poured it into the old brown bowl. The nobleman's eyes narrowed. "Do you mock me?" Mira bowed. "No, sir. I serve you what I serve myself when I forget the taste of enough." The guards shifted. The customers froze. The nobleman stared at the bowl. Perhaps no one had spoken to him so plainly in many years. He lifted it, suspicious at first, then slowly. The tea was fragrant, but what unsettled him was the space above the tea. The bowl was not full. There was room for the hand, room for the steam, room for the drinker to enter without spilling. He drank. His face did not change much, but his shoulders dropped a little. "Why do you not fill it?" he asked. Mira said, "Because a bowl filled to the edge cannot receive the path to the mouth. Because a day filled to the edge cannot receive kindness. Because a heart filled to the edge with proving cannot receive peace." The nobleman looked down for a long time. Then he asked for a second bowl, not because the first had been insufficient, but because the first had been enough for him to notice his thirst. News of this traveled widely. Some people turned Mira into a legend, which made her smile because legends are another kind of decoration. She continued sweeping her own floor. She continued burning the rice when distracted. She continued feeling pride sometimes, and jealousy sometimes, and tenderness often. The bowl of enough did not make her perfect. It only kept inviting her back. In old age, Mira gave the shop to her apprentice. Before leaving, she placed the brown bowl on the counter. The apprentice asked, "Is this bowl sacred?" Mira laughed gently, "Only when used." There was also an old traveler who came to the tea house only once. His sandals were split, his robe was faded by road dust, and his eyes carried the softness of someone who had stopped arguing with the weather. He ordered no special tea. He asked only for hot water in the plainest bowl. When the keeper apologized for having no fresh cakes left, the traveler smiled and said that an empty table could be a generous table when the heart had stopped demanding decoration. He lifted the bowl with both hands, inhaled the steam, and drank as if receiving a blessing from the entire earth. The young server watched him with secret confusion. She had served nobles who complained about porcelain, scholars who complained about temperature, and merchants who complained about price. This poor traveler complained about nothing, and somehow the room around him felt richer. Later, when he left, the server found a single wild flower beside the bowl. It had been placed there without performance, a small answer to the question the house had been asking for years: how much is enough? The keeper kept that flower in water until its petals fell. He did not preserve it. He did not press it between pages. He let it fade in plain sight near the window, where everyone could see that even a beautiful thing did not need to be made permanent in order to be honored. This became another quiet teaching in the tea house. Guests began to notice the first sip instead of rushing toward the last. They began to hear the kettle before asking for more. And the keeper, who had once believed peace would arrive only after the house was praised by important people, discovered that peace had been sitting in the corner all along, waiting for him to stop decorating the doorway. Then she said, "Remember this, enough is not the same as little. Enough is the end of arguing with the present moment. If you have little, meet little completely. If you have plenty, meet plenty without being owned by it." The bowl teaches by holding and releasing. It receives tea, offers warmth, becomes empty, and is not ashamed. Tonight, let your own heart become such a bowl. Not perfect, not polished for display, not filled to the rim with everything unfinished. Let there be space. Space around the worry, space around the memory, space around the person you think you must become. Breathe in as if receiving warm tea. Breathe out as if setting the bowl down. Nothing more is needed in this breath. Nothing more is needed for this moment to hold you. Story 3. The Garden of Unsent Letters. The garden changed people because it did not argue with their first draft. If a person arrived full of blame, the garden allowed blame to be written. If someone arrived full of longing, the garden allowed longing to hang openly in the air. The old monk knew that truth often begins rough. A polished lie is more dangerous than an honest storm. Tally learned that silence has many kinds. There is the silence of punishment, which closes doors. There is the silence of fear, which hides under blankets. There is the silence of ripening, which asks nothing and changes everything. In the monastery garden, she slowly left the first 2 silences and began to trust the third. When the new moon fires burned the fallen tablets, the monks chanted no dramatic words. They simply stood near the flames and breathed. Tally saw that release did not need to be witnessed loudly. A burden could leave quietly, like a guest who sees that the household is tired and closes the door softly behind him. Beyond the tea town, past the fields of yellow grass and the road where cranes gathered in shallow pools, there was a monastery with no gate. Travelers often missed it because it did not announce itself. A low wall curved through bamboo. A footpath crossed a patch of wild mint. A wooden door stood open day and night, not because the monks were careless, but because their teacher used to say, "A closed heart needs a guard. An open heart needs only attention." Behind the monastery was a garden unlike any other. Instead of stone lanterns or trimmed pines, it held hundreds of small wooden tablets hanging from strings. Some were tied to plum branches, some to bamboo poles, some hung beneath the eaves where the rain could not reach them. On each tablet was a letter that had never been sent. People came to this garden when words were too heavy to carry and too dangerous to deliver. They came with anger, longing, regret, apology, love, and grief. They wrote to parents who had died, friends who had vanished, children who would not listen, and younger versions of themselves who had done the best they could with the wisdom they had. The monks did not read the letters. They only offered ink, wood, and quiet. A woman named Tali arrived there at the end of autumn. She was not old, but sorrow had made her movements careful. For years, she had carried anger toward her older brother Joran. When their mother became ill, Tali had stayed beside the bed while Joran traveled for trade. He sent money, but not presents. When their mother died, he returned late, stood at the funeral, wept loudly, and spoke as though grief had belonged equally to them both. Tali did not forgive him. After the funeral, they divided the family house. They divided bowls, quilts, land, debts, and memories. Every object became evidence. Every conversation became a trial. At last they stopped speaking, yet silence did not bring peace. Tali carried arguments with him inside her head for 9 years. She won each one and felt no freer. When she reached the monastery, the first monk she met was sweeping leaves from a path already covered with leaves. He was very old and very cheerful. She asked whether he was failing at the task. He answered, "Of course, that is why it keeps me humble." Something about this irritated her, which meant it was useful. She told him she had come to write a letter. He gave her a wooden tablet, a brush, and a cup of tea. Then he pointed toward the garden. Tali sat beneath a plum tree and began. The first letter was sharp. It accused. It remembered every absence. It named every wound. The brush moved quickly, almost violently. When she finished, her hand ached. She expected relief, but instead she felt exposed, as if she had poured poison into a bowl and discovered she was still holding the bowl. She brought the tablet to the old monk. He did not read it. He only asked, "Is it complete?" Tali said, "Yes." The monk nodded. "Then hang it where the wind can teach it." She tied it to a branch. The tablet moved slightly in the evening air. The words remained, but they were no longer inside her body in exactly the same way. During the first week, Tali returned to the garden each morning. Her practice was writing the same letter in softer ink. The old monk gave almost no instruction. He swept leaves, he boiled water. Sometimes he fell asleep sitting upright in the sun. When Tali demanded clearer guidance, he said, "Write until the one who writes becomes quieter than the words." At first, this sounded useless, but repetition revealed what intensity had hidden. The first letters were full of Joran's failures. The later letters began to show her own loneliness. Beneath the anger was exhaustion. Beneath exhaustion was love that had not known how to remain soft after being disappointed. One morning, while watching plum leaves falling without choosing where to land, Tali understood anger often repeats because it has not yet found the grief underneath. The understanding did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like warm water poured over cold hands. She did not suddenly approve of what had happened. She did not pretend her brother had been present when he had not. But the story inside her became less narrow. There was more than one pain in the room. The old monk noticed the change and gave her a new tablet. Today, he said, write a letter that does not ask the past to change. Tali sat for a long time before touching brush to wood. Her mind wanted to argue. It wanted to prove. It wanted to build a monument to how much she had carried. But her breath had learned a slower road. At last, she wrote only a few lines. They were not grand. They did not solve the family. They did not make her holy. Yet when she tied the tablet to the plum tree, her chest felt less crowded. That evening, the monastery bells sounded for supper. The monks moved quietly, but not solemnly. Someone laughed in the kitchen. Someone dropped a ladle. Steam rose from rice bowls. Tali realized that peace was not a place where nothing hurt. Peace was a place where hurt did not have to be crowned king. She slept deeply that night, not because everything was forgiven, but because for one night she had stopped rehearsing the old courtroom inside her mind. One morning, while watching mist gathering low against the garden wall, Tali understood love can become resentment when it has nowhere tender to rest. The understanding did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like warm water poured over cold hands. She did not suddenly approve of what had happened. She did not pretend her brother had been present when he had not. But the story inside her became less narrow. There was more than one pain in the room. One morning, while watching crows crossing the pale sky at dusk, Tali understood understanding is not the same as excusing, but it opens a window in a locked room. The understanding did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like warm water poured over cold hands. She did not suddenly approve of what had happened. She did not pretend her brother had been present when he had not. But the story inside her became less narrow. There was more than one pain in the room. One morning, while watching rain tapping the tablets until every letter sounded alike, Tali understood. Forgiveness begins by returning kindness to the self that survived. The understanding did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like warm water poured over cold hands. She did not suddenly approve of what had happened. She did not pretend her brother had been present when he had not. But the story inside her became less narrow. There was more than one pain in the room. One morning, while watching new buds appearing on branches that had looked empty, Tali understood some burdens leave only after they are no longer entertained. The understanding did not arrive like thunder. It arrived like warm water poured over cold hands. She did not suddenly approve of what had happened. She did not pretend her brother had been present when he had not. But the story inside her became less narrow. There was more than one pain in the room. On the 49th day, Joran came to the monastery. Tali saw him from across the courtyard and felt the old fire rise. Her first impulse was to leave. Her second was to speak first and wound first. Her third, quieter than the others, was to breathe. She held to the third impulse as one holds a small lamp in wind. Joran looked older. His hair had thinned. His merchant's coat was patched at the elbow. He bowed awkwardly, as if the body remembered a brother's love, but not the path toward it. "I heard you were here," he said. Tali wanted to say many things. Instead, she asked, "Why did you come?" He looked toward the garden of tablets. "Because I have been writing letters in my head for 9 years and sending none of them." The sentence entered her carefully. It did not erase anything. It did not repay lost nights beside their mother's bed. But it showed her that she had not been the only one living inside an unsent letter. They sat beneath the plum tree. At first, they spoke badly. They interrupted. They defended. They misunderstood. Then the old monk passed by with a broom and said, without stopping, "Slower words leave smaller bruises." So they began again. Joran spoke of shame. Tali spoke of abandonment. He spoke of fear that he could not bear to watch their mother weaken. She spoke of fury that his fear had left her alone. Neither became innocent. Neither became villain. They became human in front of each other, which was far more difficult. Before sunset, the monk brought 2 tablets, 1 each, he said. Not to solve the past, to release the future from repeating it. Tali wrote, "I will not use my pain to keep love outside the door forever." Joran wrote, "I will not let shame dress itself as distance." They hung the tablets side by side. Wind moved them gently, and for a moment the 2 pieces of wood touched, separated, touched again. Years later, Tali returned to the garden many times, sometimes with Joran, sometimes alone. She never became a person without anger, but anger no longer owned the entire house of her heart. It became a visitor, sometimes an important visitor, sometimes a confused one. She learned to offer it tea, listen for what it protected, and let it leave before nightfall. The garden grew. More tablets came. Some words faded under sun. Some strings broke, and the tablets fell into the grass. The monks collected the fallen ones and burned them during the new moon, not as destruction, but as completion. Smoke rose into the sky, carrying thousands of sentences that no longer needed to be held in the hand. In the season when the garden first began to bloom, May discovered that forgiveness was not a single grand gesture. It was more like watering. Some mornings, the soil received it easily. Other mornings, the ground felt hard, and the water ran along the surface without sinking in. On those days, she did not accuse herself of failure. She simply returned with a watering can the next morning. She wrote letters she never sent to those who had hurt her, but she also wrote letters to the younger version of herself who had not known how to speak. "Dear one," she wrote, "you were not weak because you stayed silent. You were surviving with the tools you had. Dear one, you were not foolish because you loved. You were learning how wide the heart can open before it learns where to place a gate." These letters were folded and placed beneath the roots of a white jasmine plant. When the jasmine flowered, its fragrance did not explain the past. It simply rose into the evening air, clean and unburdened. Neighbors began to bring their own unsent words. A fisherman brought a letter to his father, who had died before an apology could be spoken. A young wife brought a letter to the child she had lost before naming. A teacher brought a letter to a student he had once shamed in anger. May did not read any of them. She only showed each person where the soil was soft. Together they buried the papers beneath herbs, lilies, and small trees that would one day give shade to strangers. In this way, the garden became a place where old pain did not vanish, but changed its work. What had once tightened the chest now fed roots. What had once kept people awake now opened into leaves. Tonight, you may have unsent letters within you, words to someone who hurt you, words to someone you miss, words to yourself from years ago. You do not need to mail them. You do not need to swallow them. Let the breath become a small wooden tablet. On the inhale, allow the truth to appear. On the exhale, hang it gently in the garden of awareness. The wind can hold what your body is tired of carrying. The night can receive what the day could not resolve. Forgiveness does not have to be forced. It can begin as space. It can begin with the humble sentence, I am willing to stop hurting myself with the shape of yesterday. Story 4. The River That Carried No Name. The river did not teach in sentences, yet Aaron found himself understanding more beside it than he had understood in halls full of debate. The river accepted every reflection and kept none. It received the face of a king and the face of a beggar with the same silver patience. It carried both until the light changed. One morning, Aaron asked Ohan whether he missed the life he might have had elsewhere. Ohan rested his oar across his knees. Elsewhere is a useful direction, he said, but a poor home. When I am here, here is enough river. When I am there, there will be enough sky. The trouble begins when the body sits in one place and the mind demands another throne. By the time Aaron left the crossing, he had not solved himself. This was important. He had only become less interested in turning himself into a problem. He could still feel pride, but now pride was transparent. He could still feel shame, but shame no longer spoke with the voice of law. The river had not removed his humanity. It had made room for it to flow. There was once a wide river that separated two kingdoms. On one side stood cities of red roofs, watchtowers, and crowded markets. On the other side were forests, temples, and roads that vanished into blue mountains. The river was calm in summer, silver in winter, and brown during the rains. It carried leaves, lanterns, fish, fallen branches, and the reflections of people who believed they were standing still. At the narrowest crossing lived an old ferryman named Ohan. No one knew his age. Some said he had been there for 40 years. Some said 60. Children believed he had been born from river mist and would one day dissolve back into it. Ohan did not correct them. He liked children because they asked impossible questions and then forgot to demand answers. Ohan's ferry was plain. It had no painted dragon, no carved roof, no bright flag. Yet people trusted it. Merchants crossed with goods. Monks crossed with bowls. Soldiers crossed with hidden tears. Prisoners crossed with lowered eyes. Ohan rowed each one the same way, steadily, neither too fast nor too slow. If passengers wanted to talk, he listened. If they wanted silence, he listened to that too. One evening, a traveler arrived carrying 3 bags and an expression of great importance. His name was Aaron, though he announced it before anyone asked. He had been a scholar in the city, advisor to officials, speaker in halls, writer of documents sealed with red wax. He was respected, feared by some, envied by others, and very tired. After a political change, his title had been removed. Friends became cautious. Invitations disappeared. doors opened less easily. Aaron decided to cross the river and seek a new place where people would recognize his value. He stepped onto the ferry and placed his bags carefully beside him. Ohan pushed away from the bank. For a while, only the oar spoke. Then Aaron said, "Do you know who I am?" Ohan looked at the river. "On this boat, you are the passenger nearest the bow." Aaron frowned. "I mean my position." "Your position is seated," said Ohan. Aaron thought the ferryman was mocking him. He began listing his education, appointments, accomplishments, and the names of people who once sought his counsel. Ohan rowed. The river received every word without becoming impressed. At last Aaron said, "I have lost much." Ohan nodded. "Then perhaps the boat is lighter than it was." The scholar's face hardened. "You speak as if loss is simple." "No," said Ohan. "I speak as if carrying what is already left is heavy." The ferry moved into the center of the river. The current there was deep and patient. The city behind them grew smaller. The forest ahead had not yet grown clear. Aaron felt suspended between who he had been and who he feared he might become. It frightened him. Aaron did not leave after reaching the far bank. Pride told him to walk away. Exhaustion told him to sit beneath a willow tree. Exhaustion was wiser. He watched Ohan take the ferry back and forth until dusk deepened and lamps appeared along both shores. During the first crossing, Aaron noticed a young soldier returning without victory. The sight troubled him because it did not fit into his old measures. In the city, he had ranked people by influence, usefulness, and speech. On the river, those measures weakened. A person was a person crossing water. Each carried an unseen weather. Each stepped on and stepped off. The ferry did not ask which name was largest. He saw his armor bright, but his eyes unsure. Something in that image entered him more deeply than advice could have. The river did not explain. It demonstrated. It kept moving around every reflection, allowing each to appear clearly and disappear completely. When Ohan returned, Aaron asked, "Do you never wonder who among your passengers is important?" Ohan tied the rope loosely around a post. "When a person is drowning, importance does not help me pull them from the river. Arms do. Attention does." Aaron was silent. The ferryman continued, "A title is useful in the place where titles are used. A bowl is useful when there is soup. But if you wear the bowl on your head after the meal, people may still bow, but your neck will ache." Aaron almost laughed. It came out more like a breath. That night, he slept in a small hut near the crossing. He dreamed he was standing before a crowd, speaking beautifully, but no sound came from his mouth. At first he panicked. Then he noticed the crowd was not angry. They were resting. Without his words, the hall had become peaceful. He woke before dawn, with tears on his face. For the first time in many years, he did not know what to do next. This not knowing felt like failure at first. Then, slowly, it began to feel like a room whose windows had been opened. During the second crossing, Aaron noticed a widow carrying seeds in a cloth pouch. The sight troubled him because it did not fit into his old measures. In the city, he had ranked people by influence, usefulness, and speech. On the river, those measures weakened. A person was a person crossing water. Each carried an unseen weather. Each stepped on and stepped off. The fairy did not ask which name was largest. He saw her grief quiet, but her hands steady. Something in that image entered him more deeply than advice could have. The river did not explain. It demonstrated. It kept moving around every reflection, allowing each to appear clearly and disappear completely. During the third crossing, Aaron noticed a child who had forgotten his own question. The sight troubled him because it did not fit into his old measures. In the city, he had ranked people by influence, usefulness, and speech. On the river, those measures weakened. A person was a person crossing water. Each carried an unseen weather. Each stepped on and stepped off. The fairy did not ask which name was largest. He saw laughter skipping across the water. Something in that image entered him more deeply than advice could have. The river did not explain. It demonstrated. It kept moving around every reflection, allowing each to appear clearly and disappear completely. During the fourth crossing, Aaron noticed a merchant whose boxes were empty after a failed journey. The sight troubled him because it did not fit into his old measures. In the city, he had ranked people by influence, usefulness, and speech. On the river, those measures weakened. A person was a person crossing water. Each carried an unseen weather. Each stepped on and stepped off. The fairy did not ask which name was largest. He saw the hollow sound of wood tapping wood. Something in that image entered him more deeply than advice could have. The river did not explain. It demonstrated. It kept moving around every reflection, allowing each to appear clearly and disappear completely. During the fifth crossing, Aaron noticed a monk with patched sleeves and no luggage. The sight troubled him because it did not fit into his old measures. In the city, he had ranked people by influence, usefulness, and speech. On the river, those measures weakened. A person was a person crossing water. Each carried an unseen weather. Each stepped on and stepped off. The fairy did not ask which name was largest. He saw the river reflected only sky around him. Something in that image entered him more deeply than advice could have. The river did not explain. It demonstrated. It kept moving around every reflection, allowing each to appear clearly and disappear completely. Aaron stayed by the river for 7 days. He helped Ohan mend a rope, patch a board, and carry jars of water. His hands, accustomed to paper and seals, blistered quickly. Hoan showed him how to wrap cloth around the oar handle and how to listen for the change in current beneath the boat. On the 7th evening, fog covered the river so thickly that neither shore could be seen. A woman arrived carrying a sick child. She needed the healer on the far side. The crossing was dangerous in fog, but waiting was also dangerous. Ohan looked at the water, then at Aaron. "You have watched the current," he said. "Will you sit at the bow and listen?" Aaron wanted to say that he was not qualified. Then he almost smiled, because once he had believed himself qualified for everything, now he was being asked only to listen. He sat at the bow. The fairy entered the fog. The world disappeared to a few small sounds. The dip of the oar, the child's uneven breathing, the mother's whispered prayer, water touching wood. Aaron listened with his whole body. When the current changed, he raised a hand. Ohan adjusted. When drifting branches knocked softly against the hull, Aaron pointed. The boat moved slowly, trusting attention more than sight. Halfway across, Aaron forgot to be Aaron. There was no dismissed scholar, no advisor, no wounded pride, no future reputation. There was fog, boat, child, mother, ferryman, breath, water. Nothing was missing. Nothing needed a title. The moment was complete because it was fully inhabited. They reached the far bank safely. The mother ran toward the healer's house, carrying the child. Ohan secured the ferry. Aaron stood beside him, trembling with relief. "What was that?" Aaron asked. "Crossing," said Ohan. "No," Aaron whispered. "For a moment, I was not carrying myself." The old ferryman nodded. "Then the river has begun teaching you." Months passed. Aaron did not become a ferryman forever, though for a season he helped Ohan. Later he traveled to the forest temples, then to villages where children needed someone to teach letters. When people asked his name, he gave it simply. When they asked what he had been, he answered, if useful, and remained silent if not. Sometimes he still felt the old hunger to be recognized. When it arose, he did not hate it. He imagined it as a tired official who had served too long and needed a chair. Years later, Aaron returned to the crossing. Owen was gone. No one knew whether he had died, wandered away, or become missed, as the children predicted. The ferry remained tied to the post. Beside it was a small wooden sign in Ohan's handwriting. Row steadily. The river is not impressed, but it is kind to those who listen. Aaron became the ferryman for a while, not because he had no other identity, but because he no longer needed identity to be permanent. He carried merchants, monks, soldiers, brides, prisoners, children, and old men who asked impossible questions. When passengers told him who they were, he listened respectfully. When they told him what they had lost, he listened more deeply. Sometimes, in the center of the river, someone would ask, "What is the other shore like?" Aaron would answer, "It depends on how tightly you hold this one." And when night came, he watched the moon lay a silver path across the water. The river carried the moon without possessing it. It carried shadows without becoming dark. It carried names, titles, grief, joy, pride, and surrender. It carried everything by not becoming anything. As Tovan followed the river farther east, he met people who tried to give him names. A boatman called him Brother. A child called him Old Mountain, though he was not old. A woman selling rice cakes called him Lucky, because rain stopped whenever he entered her stall. Each name touched him for a moment and then fell away. He did not reject them. He smiled at each one, but he no longer gathered names like stones in a pouch. He saw that a name could be useful in the marketplace and useless under the stars. It could help someone call you to supper, but it could not tell the whole truth of the one who heard the call. At night, sleeping beneath bamboo, he listened to insects singing without signing their songs. The river moved beside him, known by many villages, owned by none of them. Tovan began to understand that freedom was not becoming invisible. It was becoming light enough that every name could pass through without building a cage. Near the end of his journey, he reached a wide place where the river slowed before meeting the sea. The water no longer hurried. It spread into silver channels, reflecting clouds, birds, and the low fire of sunset. Tovan sat on the bank and placed his hand in the current. He thought of every person he had been, the frightened son, the proud apprentice, the angry friend, the silent traveler, the man without a name. None of them were false, yet none of them were complete. They were waves made by wind, shaped for a while, then returned. As darkness gathered, he whispered no vow and made no promise. He only breathed with the tide. The river had carried no name because it needed none. It reached the sea by being exactly what it was, moment by moment, without stopping to explain itself. Tonight, perhaps you too are between shores. One part of you is leaving a day behind. Another part reaches toward tomorrow. Between them is this quiet crossing called sleep. You do not need to bring every name with you. You do not need to prove your usefulness to the night. You do not need to defend the story of who you have been. Let the boat move. Let the oar enter and leave the water. Let the fog be fog. Let the far bank wait without being forced closer. In this breath, you are not your title. You are not your worry. You are not the praise you received or the mistake you made. You are the awareness crossing gently through all of it. He saw the hollow sound of wood tapping wood. Something in that image entered him more deeply than advice could have. The river did not explain. It demonstrated. It kept moving around every reflection, allowing each to appear clearly and disappear completely. During the fifth crossing, Aaron noticed a monk with patched sleeves and no luggage. The sight troubled him because it did not fit into his old measures. In the city, he had ranked people by influence, usefulness, and speech. On the river, those measures weakened. A person was a person crossing water. Each carried an unseen weather. Each stepped on and stepped off. The ferry did not ask which name was largest. He saw the river reflected only sky around him. Something in that image entered him more deeply than advice could have. The river did not explain. It demonstrated. It kept moving around every reflection, allowing each to appear clearly and disappear completely. Aaron stayed by the river for 7 days. He helped Ohan mend a rope, patch a board, and carry jars of water. His hands, accustomed to paper and seals, blistered quickly. Ohan showed him how to wrap cloth around the oar handle and how to listen for the change in current beneath the boat. On the 7th evening, fog covered the river so thickly that neither shore could be seen. A woman arrived carrying a sick child. She needed the healer on the far side. The crossing was dangerous in fog, but waiting was also dangerous. Ohan looked at the water, then at Aaron. "You have watched the current," he said. "Will you sit at the bow and listen?" Aaron wanted to say that he was not qualified. Then he almost smiled, because once he had believed himself qualified for everything. Now he was being asked only to listen. He sat at the bow. The ferry entered the fog. The world disappeared to a few small sounds. The dip of the oar, the child's uneven breathing, the mother's whispered prayer, water touching wood. Aaron listened with his whole body. When the current changed, he raised a hand. Ohan adjusted. When drifting branches knocked softly against the hull, Aaron pointed. The boat moved slowly, trusting attention more than sight. Halfway across, Aaron forgot to be Aaron. There was no dismissed scholar, no advisor, no wounded pride, no future reputation. There was fog, boat, child, mother, ferryman, breath, water. Nothing was missing. Nothing needed a title. The moment was complete because it was fully inhabited. They reached the far bank safely. The mother ran toward the healer's house, carrying the child. Ohan secured the ferry. Aaron stood beside him, trembling with relief. "What was that?" Aaron asked. "Crossing," said Ohan. "No," Aaron whispered. "For a moment, I was not carrying myself." The old ferryman nodded. "Then the river has begun teaching you." Months passed. Aaron did not become a ferryman forever, though for a season he helped Ohan. Later he traveled to the forest temples, then to villages where children needed someone to teach letters. When people asked his name, he gave it simply. When they asked what he had been, he answered, if useful, and remained silent if not. Sometimes he still felt the old hunger to be recognized. When it arose, he did not hate it. He imagined it as a tired official who had served too long and needed a chair. Years later, Aaron returned to the crossing. Ohan was gone. No one knew whether he had died, wandered away, or become missed as the children predicted. The ferry remained tied to the post. Beside it was a small wooden sign in Ohan's handwriting, "Row steadily." The river is not impressed, but it is kind to those who listen. Aaron became the ferryman for a while, not because he had no other identity, but because he no longer needed identity to be permanent. He carried merchants, monks, soldiers, brides, prisoners, children, and old men who asked impossible questions. When passengers told him who they were, he listened respectfully. When they told him what they had lost, he listened more deeply. Sometimes, in the center of the river, someone would ask, "What is the other shore like?" Aaron would answer, "It depends on how tightly you hold this one." And when night came, he watched the moon lay a silver path across the water. The river carried the moon without possessing it. It carried shadows without becoming dark. It carried names, titles, grief, joy, pride, and surrender. It carried everything by not becoming anything. As Tovan followed the river farther east, he met people who tried to give him names. A boatman called him brother. A child called him Old Mountain, though he was not old. A woman selling rice cakes called him Lucky, because rain stopped whenever he entered her stall. Each name touched him for a moment and then fell away. He did not reject them. He smiled at each one, but he no longer gathered names like stones in a pouch. He saw that a name could be useful in the marketplace and useless under the stars. It could help someone call you to supper, but it could not tell the whole truth of the one who heard the call. At night, sleeping beneath bamboo, he listened to insects singing without signing their songs. The river moved beside him, known by many villages, owned by none of them. Tovan began to understand that freedom was not becoming invisible. It was becoming light enough that every name could pass through without building a cage. Near the end of his journey, he reached a wide place where the river slowed before meeting the sea. The water no longer hurried. It spread into silver channels, reflecting clouds, birds, and the low fire of sunset. Tovan sat on the bank and placed his hand to the current. He thought of every person he had been: the frightened son, the proud apprentice, the angry friend, the silent traveler, the man without a name. None of them were false, yet none of them were complete. They were waves made by wind, shaped for a while, then returned. As darkness gathered, he whispered no vow and made no promise. He only breathed with the tide. The river had carried no name because it needed none. It reached the sea by being exactly what it was, moment by moment. without stopping to explain itself. Tonight, perhaps you too are between shores. One part of you is leaving a day behind. Another part reaches toward tomorrow. Between them is this quiet crossing called sleep. You do not need to bring every name with you. You do not need to prove your usefulness to the night. You do not need to defend the story of who you have been. Let the boat move. Let the oar enter and leave the water. Let the fog be fog. Let the far bank wait without being forced closer. In this breath, you are not your title. You are not your worry. You are not the praise you received or the mistake you made. You are the awareness, crossing gently through all of it. Story 5. The Lantern Beneath the Willow. At the far edge of the valley, beyond the ferry crossing and the fields where the evening cranes rested, there was a road that travelers used only when the larger road became too crowded. It curved beside a narrow stream, passed through a grove of pale bamboo, and ended at a willow tree whose branches touched the water like fingers blessing a sleeping child. Beneath that tree stood a stone lantern. It was old enough for moss to know its corners by heart. No one remembered who had placed the lantern there. Some said it had been set by a monk who lost his way and found compassion in the dark. Others said a mother placed it there after her son returned safely from war. The children of the nearby village believed the lantern could hear the thoughts of anyone who sat beside it. And because children are often closer to truth than certainty allows, the elders never corrected them. The lantern did not shine during the day. It waited. At dusk, when the valley lost its edges and the first stars trembled above the water, an old caretaker named Suri would come down the road with a small oil jar, a cotton wick, and a basket of dry leaves. She moved slowly, not because her body was weak, though age had bent her shoulders, but because she had learned that nothing important required a hurried hand. Each evening she cleared the fallen leaves around the lantern, cleaned the blackened glass, poured a little oil, and lit the wick. Then she sat beneath the willow until the flame became steady. Suri had once been a midwife. She had opened doors between worlds for 40 years, guiding infants into their first breath and mothers through fear deeper than language. She had heard the first cry of hundreds of children. She had also sat beside families when a cradle remained empty. Her hands had held both joy and sorrow so often that they no longer reached quickly for judgment. In the village, people trusted her with the kind of silence they could not give to others. Yet Suri carried one grief. She had never spoken. Long ago, before her hair turned silver, she had a daughter named Lian. Lian had a laugh that arrived before her body entered a room. She loved climbing trees, stealing warm cakes from windowsills, and asking questions at inconvenient times. When she was 17, she left the village to study herbal medicine in a mountain town. During the rains, a bridge collapsed. The river returned her satchel, but not her body. After Lian disappeared, Suri continued helping others give birth. She continued boiling water, wrapping blankets, naming herbs, and speaking courage into frightened rooms. The village praised her strength, but strength can sometimes be the name people give to sorrow when they do not know where to place it. Each night, after serving everyone else, Suri walked to the willow and lit the lantern for the daughter who never returned. For many years, she believed the lantern was only a memorial. She thought she was keeping a small promise alive, but as seasons passed, travelers began to stop there. Some were lost. Some were ashamed. Some were simply tired from pretending they were not tired. They saw the little flame beneath the willow and sat for a moment before continuing. Suri did not ask their stories. She placed herself nearby like a cup of warm water, available but not demanding. One winter evening, a young man named Ammon arrived at the lantern with mud on his robe and anger in his breathing. He was a carpenter's son, known in 3 villages for his skill, and in 5 villages for his pride. That day he had argued with his father, broken a measuring rod against a wall, and left the workshop swearing never to return. He walked until his anger grew cold and his feet grew heavy. When he saw the lantern, he sat down as if defeated by the simple fact of light. Suri watched him from the other side of the willow. After a long while, he said, without greeting her, "The flame is too small to guide anyone. Then it is the right size for someone who does not yet want guidance." He looked at her sharply, but the old woman was not sharp in return. This confused him. A fight needs 2 people holding the same rope. Suri had set the rope down before he arrived. Ammon stared at the flame. The wick bent slightly, recovered, and burned on. He said, "My father thinks every mistake proves I am careless." "Does every mistake prove that?" Suri asked. "No." Afraid of what? Of passing his craft to someone who may suffer from the same mistakes he once made. Fear often speaks in the voice of criticism. It believes hardness can protect love from helplessness. Ammon wanted to reject this, but the sentence moved inside him like warm tea reaching an empty stomach. He had never considered his father's scolding as anything but contempt. He looked again at the flame. It did not shout into the road. It simply showed the nearest stones. Suri reached into her basket and took out a small piece of charcoal. She drew a circle in the dirt around the lantern. Then she drew another circle farther out, and another beyond that. Light does not need to touch the whole valley to be useful, she said. It only needs to reveal the next step. When your mind demands the whole future, it becomes dark by trying to see too far. When he stood, his anger had not vanished, but it had become less proud of itself. He bowed awkwardly and walked back toward the village. The next morning he returned to the workshop. He did not apologize beautifully. His father did not receive him gracefully. But between them there was one small circle of light, and for that day it was enough. After Ammon, more people began coming to the willow. A widow came with her husband's sandals and sat until the sound of the stream softened her weeping. A merchant came after losing money in a gamble he had called an investment. A girl came because she was afraid of marrying a kind man she did not love. A monk came because he had spent years teaching peace and secretly hated another monk's popularity. Each person sat near the lantern. Each person discovered that a small, honest light can be less frightening than a great revealing sun. Suri never claimed the lantern healed anyone. She would have laughed at such a claim. A flame cannot walk a road for a traveler. It cannot undo a bridge collapse, repair a harsh word, or replace the one who is missing. It can only say, "Here, this much can be seen. This much is safe to meet. Begin here." In the 7th spring after Lian's disappearance, a stranger came to the willow carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. He was a river trader, thin from travel and quiet from years of watching weather. He waited until Suri had lit the lantern, then placed the bundle at her feet. "I was told you might be the mother," he said. Suri's hands became still. Inside the cloth was a wooden hairpin, carved in the shape of a small crane. Suri had made it for Lien's 16th birthday. Alongside it was a water-damaged notebook filled with herbal drawings. The trader had found them years ago in a river market far from the valley. Only recently had he heard the story of a midwife whose daughter vanished in the rains. Suri took the hairpin in both hands. For a moment, the entire valley seemed to inhale and not release. She had spent years lighting the lantern because nothing had returned. Now, something had returned, and it did not make the loss smaller. It made it specific again. Not a story, not a tragedy spoken gently by neighbors, a wooden crane, a young girl's careful drawings, a life that had once reached for healing plants and cakes cooling on windowsills. The trader lowered his head. "I am sorry it took so long." Suri could not speak. She pressed the hairpin against her chest and listened to the stream moving under the willow. That night, she did not give advice to anyone. When travelers came, she only nodded. When Imon, now older and calmer, arrived and saw the bundle, he sat beside her without asking. The lantern burned between them. Its small flame did not explain sorrow. It accompanied it. Near midnight, Suri whispered, "I thought I was lighting this for her." Iman waited. "Now I see I was lighting it because I was still here." They were not a betrayal of Lien. They were the first doorway through which grief and living could enter the same room. For years, Suri had believed that continuing to suffer was a way of remaining loyal. But the lantern had been teaching another loyalty, quieter and more difficult, to love the dead without refusing the life that still asked to be tended. After that night, Suri changed the practice. She still lit the lantern at dusk, but before sitting down, she named one living thing aloud. Sometimes she said, "This stream." Sometimes, "The hands that still know how to warm a newborn." Sometimes, when the night was very tender, she said, "This breath that did not ask permission to arrive." The villagers noticed a softness in her that was different from endurance. She laughed more often, not loudly, but like a match catching. She began teaching younger midwives with less severity toward their mistakes. When they forgot a cloth or confused two herbs, she corrected them carefully, then reminded them to breathe. She said, "A frightened hand cannot learn. First, bring the hand back to the body, then show it what to do." One evening, a boy asked whether the lantern belonged to the dead or the living. Suri looked through the willow branches toward the first star. "Both," she said. "The dead teach us tenderness. The living give us a place to practice it." Years turned the moss thicker. Suri's steps grew shorter. Imon became a master carpenter and built a small bench near the willow, low and wide enough for 3 people, or one person with a heavy heart. He carved no decoration into it except a tiny circle on the underside where almost no one could see. When Suri noticed, he said, "For the next step." In her final autumn, Suri knew her body was preparing to loosen. She was not afraid exactly. She had accompanied too many beginnings and endings to believe they were separate countries. Still, she felt a human trembling. The night before she took to her bed, She walked to the willow with Leanne's wooden hairpin tucked into her sleeve. Emmon walked behind her, carrying the oil jar. She cleaned the glass herself. Her fingers shook, but she did not hurry. She poured the oil, set the wick, and lit the flame. Then she placed the hairpin in a small hollow at the base of the lantern, not as an offering to sadness, but as a sign that love had found another way to remain. "When I am gone," she told Emmon, "do not make this place solemn. Light is not solemn. It is generous. Let people cry here, but let them also laugh. Let children ask foolish questions. Let tired men sleep on the bench. Let no one pretend the flame is larger than it is." Iman nodded, though tears had made his face young again. Suri touched the stone lantern. A small light is honest. It does not promise morning. It only keeps company with the dark. She died 3 days later, at dawn, with 2 young midwives beside her and the sound of rain on the roof. The whole village came to the willow that evening. No one planned a ceremony, yet one formed from the simple movements of people who knew how to gather around loss. Emmon lit the lantern. A child placed a wildflower beside it. A merchant brought oil. The widow brought a cloth to clean the glass. A monk who had once envied another monk's fame chanted softly, not to impress heaven, but to steady his own heart. From that time on, the lantern was tended by many hands. No single person owned the practice, which is why it endured. Some nights a grandmother lit it, some nights a farmer, some nights a child under guidance, proud and solemn, holding the match as if carrying a star. The light remained small. The valley remained imperfect. People still argued, still feared, still lost what they loved. But when the darkness felt complete, there was one place where a flame answered without noise. Travelers began calling it the lantern beneath the willow. Those who needed miracles were sometimes disappointed. Those who needed a next step often found one. In later years, when the village became larger and the new road brought strangers who did not know Suri's name, the lantern continued its patient work. A tax collector once sat there after a day of speaking harshly to poor farmers, and before leaving, he removed one unnecessary fee from his ledger. A bride sat there the night before her wedding, not because she doubted love, but because she was frightened by the size of being known. An old teacher sat there after forgetting the name of a student he had loved, and the flame showed him that forgetting a name did not erase the tenderness that had once spoken it. None of these moments were recorded. No stone tablet listed them. The willow kept no account. This was part of the lantern's mercy. It allowed change to happen without turning it into performance. A heart could soften in secret and still become kinder in public. The lesson remains small enough to enter ordinary life. Clean the glass, offer the flame, take the next step, and do not demand that healing arrive with applause. Even the person who believed nothing had changed often discovered, days later, that one cruel sentence had gone unspoken, one apology had become possible, or one breath had been received without argument. And perhaps this is the whole teaching of the lantern. Not every darkness must be defeated. Some darkness only asks not to be faced alone. Some grief does not need a lesson before it needs warmth. Some fear does not need a philosophy before it needs one visible stone beneath the foot. Tonight, imagine such a lantern within you. Do not make it grand. Do not force it to brighten the entire future. Let it be small enough to trust. Let it show only this breath, this pillow, this room, this gentle permission to stop carrying the whole valley in your arms. If sorrow is here, let the lantern sit beside sorrow. If worry is here, let the lantern touch only the nearest edge of worry. If your mind asks for answers that belong to another day, let the flame bow and remain simple. You are not required to find the morning before you sleep. You are only invited to rest near one honest light. In its quiet glow, the dark does not disappear, but it becomes less lonely. And sometimes, when the dark becomes less lonely, the heart remembers that it has been accompanied all along. Story 6. The Mountain That Bowed to a Cloud. North of the Willow Road, where the air thinned and the pine trees grew twisted from listening to wind, there stood a mountain called Cairo. It was not the highest mountain in the region, but it had a presence that made people lower their voices when speaking of it. Its cliffs were gray and blue. Its summit disappeared, often into mist. In the morning, light touched its upper stones long before it reached the valley. So villagers said the mountain woke before everyone else. At the foot of Cairo lived a stone carver named Dalen. He was known for making statues that looked almost ready to breathe. His hands could find a face hidden inside a block of granite. He could turn rough stone into folded robes, prayer beads, sleeping animals, and bowls so smooth they seemed shaped by water. People praised his patience, but Dalen knew the truth. He was patient with stone because stone could not leave him. His wife had left 3 years earlier, not through death, not through cruelty, but through the slow exhaustion of 2 people who had forgotten how to speak without defending themselves. Her name was Asha. She loved music, laughter, and rooms with open windows. Dalen loved work, silence, and the certainty of finished things. At first, their differences were charming. Later, they became walls. When she finally departed for her sister's village, she said, "You carve everything except the hardness in yourself." He told himself it was unfair. He told himself she had never understood discipline. He told himself many things. Yet when he worked alone at night, the words returned with the dust. You carve everything except the hardness in yourself. One year, the abbot of a mountain monastery commissioned Dalen to carve a seated Buddha from a large stone near the upper path. The stone had rested there for centuries, half buried in earth, facing the valley. The abbot did not want it moved. He wanted the statue carved where the stone already was. "The mountain has held it this long," the abbot said. "Let the figure arise without being taken from its place." Dalen accepted. He liked the challenge. He liked that villagers would climb and see his work. He liked, though he did not admit it, the idea of leaving something permanent on a mountain that outlasted arguments, marriages, and human disappointments. Each morning, he climbed the path with tools wrapped in cloth. The journey took nearly 2 hours. He passed a spring, a field of low shrubs, a bend where hawks circled, and finally the ledge where the stone waited. From there he could see the whole valley. Rice fields, roofs, river threads, smoke from breakfast fires, and the road that led eventually toward Asha's village. He always looked away from that road quickly. The first cuts were satisfying. Chips flew. Lines appeared. A shoulder emerged. The rough mass began to obey his vision. Dalen worked with intensity that impressed the monks who sometimes passed by. He bowed when they greeted him, but he did not invite conversation. Conversation had become, to him, a place where people misunderstood tools they did not know how to use. One afternoon, as he shaped the statue's folded hands, a cloud descended without warning. Mountain weather is a teacher that does not ask permission. The valley vanished. The path vanished. Even the stone before him blurred. Moisture settled on his eyelashes and tools. Dalen cursed under his breath. He could not carve what he could not see. He sat beneath a pine, waiting for the cloud to lift. It did not. Hour after hour, the world remained soft and white. At last an old nun appeared on the path, carrying a bundle of firewood. She was small, barefoot, despite the cold, and cheerful in a way that made Dalen suspicious. "You look angry at the weather," she said. "I came to work." The cloud came to work also. Dalen looked at her. "Its work is to stop mine." The nun laughed. "Perhaps its work is to show you where you believe only striking stone is work." She continued up the path before he could answer. Dalen sat in the cloud, offended by a woman who had accurately named him after one sentence. The cloud remained for 3 days. Dalen climbed anyway, hoping it would clear, but each time the ledge was wrapped in mist. He could touch the stone, but not judge its form. He could hear water dripping from pine needles. He could hear small birds moving invisibly. He could hear his own irritation repeating itself, as if irritation were a prayer he had practiced for years. On the 3rd day, he brought no chisel. He told himself this was because work was impossible. In truth, a part of him was curious what would happen if he climbed without tools. The ledge looked different when he did not arrive to change it. The stone was no longer a task. The pine was no longer an obstacle. Everything was simply present. And Dalen, without his tools, did not know how to make himself important. He sat beside the unfinished statue. The Buddha's face had not yet been carved. It was only a suggestion in stone, a smooth plane awaiting features. In the mist, the faceless figure seemed more complete than Dalen expected. Without eyes, it saw nothing and rejected nothing. Without a mouth, it argued with no one. Without expression, it held every possible expression quietly inside. The old nun returned, this time with an empty basket. "No tools today?" she asked. "No use." "Good," she said. "Then perhaps you can begin." Dalen sighed. "Begin what?" "Listening to the part of the mountain that cannot be carved." She sat beside him. For a while neither spoke. The cloud moved around them like slow breath. After some time she said, "Stone teaches firmness. Cloud teaches yielding. People suffer when they choose only one teacher." He saw her opening windows while he complained about dust. He saw her humming while he measured proportions. He saw himself turning away from her tears because they had no clear solution. He had believed steadiness meant never bending. But perhaps what he called steadiness had sometimes been fear of being touched. The nun picked up a small, wet leaf and placed it on the stone. "See this?" He nodded. "The leaf cannot cut the rock, yet because it is soft, it can rest on the rock without injury. Water is softer still, but given seasons, it shapes valleys. Do not worship hardness merely because it lasts longer in one form. Some things endure by changing." Her words settled into him unwillingly. He did not like receiving wisdom while damp and unproductive. Still, he did not push it away. When the cloud finally lifted, the valley appeared piece by piece. First a line of river, then a roof, then fields shining with late light. Dalen looked at the unfinished statue and saw that his original plan for the face was wrong. He had intended a severe calm, noble and distant. Now he saw the face needed gentleness, the kind that had nothing to prove. For the first time in years, he did not force the stone to obey his first idea. He worked more slowly after that, not lazily, but with more pauses. He waited before each cut. He walked around the stone. He watched how light changed the cheek, how shadow gathered beneath the chin, how rain darkened certain lines. The monks noticed that the sound of his chisel had changed. Before, it had struck like argument. Now it answered. Dalen also began visiting the monastery kitchen after work. At first, he said little. He washed bowls. He chopped turnips. He listened to monks discuss practical matters: leaking roofs, sick goats, missing sandals, the mysterious disappearance of sweet cakes whenever novices were nearby. Their ordinariness comforted him. Peace, he realized, did not float above daily life. It washed the same bowls with less complaint. One evening, the abbot sat beside him while he sharpened tools. "How is the Buddha coming?" the abbot asked. Dalen replied, more slowly than planned. The abbot smiled. Then, perhaps, on time. "I felt the statue would show others something lasting." "It may," said the abbot, "but first it is showing you what refuses to soften." That made the words harder to avoid. That night, Dalen wrote a letter to Asha. He did not ask her to return. He did not defend himself. He did not decorate regret with beautiful phrases. He wrote, "I am beginning to see the hardness you named. I do not know yet how to change it, but I no longer want to call it strength. I hope the windows where you live open easily." He almost burned the letter. Instead, he sent it with a trader traveling toward her sister's village. Once the letter left his hand, he felt both lighter and more exposed. A message sent without demand is a strange form of bowing. It lowers something inside the sender, even if no answer returns. Weeks passed. The statue's face emerged slowly. It was not the face of someone untouched by sorrow. It was the face of someone who had allowed sorrow to pass through without becoming bitter. Dalen carved the eyes half closed, not escaping the world, not clinging to it. The mouth carried the hint of a smile so small it could be mistaken for rest. The hands rested open in the lap, palms upward, as though the stone itself had finally stopped grasping. Then came the storm. It began before dawn, with thunder behind the ridges. By midday, the mountain shook with rain. The abbot told Dalen not to climb, but Dalen had left his finest chisel at the ledge and feared rust would damage it. This reason was foolish, and he knew it. But attachment often borrows the voice of responsibility. He climbed through mud, wind, and water running over the path. When he reached the ledge, the statue was barely visible through sheets of rain. He found the chisel wrapped beneath a cloth. Safe enough. As he turned to leave, lightning struck a pine above the ledge. The tree split with a sound like the sky breaking. A heavy branch fell against the unfinished statue's shoulder. "Stone cracked," Dalen shouted, as if a body had been wounded. When the storm eased, he saw the damage clearly. A jagged line ran from the left shoulder across the chest. Months of work had been changed in one instant. He sank to the ground, rainwater and stone dust mixing beneath his knees. The old fury rose. Not small irritation, but the deep, helpless rage of a person who believes effort should protect him from loss. He wanted to curse the mountain, the weather, the monks, the foolish commission, even the absent Asha, whose sentence had started this inward excavation. But the damaged statue sat before him with half-closed eyes, receiving the crack without protest. Dalen remembered the nun. Stone teaches firmness, cloud teaches yielding. He stayed there until evening. No solution came. At last he covered the statue and descended. For 3 days he did not climb. He remained in his workshop, touching old finished pieces and finding no comfort in them. He understood now that permanence had been his secret bargain with fear. If he could carve something that lasted, perhaps nothing important would ever leave completely. But the mountain had answered, even stone can break. Even careful work can be changed by weather. Even love can leave. Even grief can become identity if held too tightly. On the 4th day, a letter arrived from Asha. Her words were brief. She thanked him for writing. She said the windows did open easily. She said she had also been learning how pain can turn memory into a weapon. She did not promise return. But at the bottom, she wrote, "If the mountain teaches you how to bow, listen well. I am trying to listen here too." Dalen read the letter many times. Something in him loosened, not because hope had been restored in the way he wanted, but because hope had been freed from demand. Asha was alive. He was alive. Both were changing beyond each other's control. This was painful. It was also strangely tender. He climbed the mountain the next morning with tools, cloth, and no plan. The crack remained. In clear light, he saw it was not only damage, it was a line of energy crossing the body, like a river finding a path. If he tried to hide it, the statue would become false. If he carved around it with care, the break might become part of the teaching. For many days he worked with the crack rather than against it. He widened some parts, softened others, and shaped the line into the fold of a robe blown by wind. The left shoulder, once smooth, became slightly lowered. The whole figure changed. It no longer looked like a Buddha untouched by storms. It looked like a Buddha who had bowed to one. When the statue was finished, the villagers climbed to see it. Some admired the skill. Some were puzzled by the lowered shoulder. A wealthy patron asked why the figure was not symmetrical. Dalen answered, "Because mountains have weather." The old nun, standing nearby, laughed so hard that 2 novices laughed with her without knowing why. The abbot placed flowers at the statue's base and bowed. "This one will help tired people," he said. Dalen understood. A perfect statue may impress the ambitious. A wounded and gentle one gives permission to the weary. Years later, pilgrims came to Cairo not because the carving was grand, though it was beautiful, but because of the feeling it gave. Those who had failed at something sat before it and felt less exiled. Those whose bodies had changed through age or illness felt seen. Those whose relationships had cracked beyond repair found not an answer, but a way to stop hating the crack. The statue did not say, "Nothing breaks." It said, "What breaks can still bow toward the light." Dalen continued carving. But never again did he worship unmarked stone. He learned to leave room for grain, weather, and surprise. When a flaw appeared, he listened before removing it. When an apprentice made a mistake, he asked what the mistake revealed. Sometimes he still grew impatient. Sometimes his old hardness returned, especially when tired. But now he recognized it as a closed fist in the heart. He would breathe, open his hand, and ask what cloud had come to teach. Asha visited the mountain 3 summers after the statue was completed. She came with her sister and a basket of plums. Dalan saw her on the path and felt the past rise, bright and aching. They bowed to each other with the courtesy of people who had once shared a house and now shared a larger silence. They sat before the statue for a long time. No dramatic reunion occurred. No one ran into anyone's arms. Life is sometimes kinder when it refuses to imitate stories that demand too much from one moment. Asha touched the carved fold where the lightning crack had become robe. "This is the most honest thing you have made," she said. Dalan smiled sadly. "It was made partly by weather. So are we," she said. They ate plums beneath the pines. They spoke of simple things first: her sister's garden, the village road, a child they both knew who had grown tall. Later they spoke of sorrow without trying to assign all of it to one side. They did not decide the future. They did not reopen the old house. But when Asha left, the road between them no longer looked like a wound. It looked like a path that might be walked with care, whether often or rarely. In old age, Dalan taught apprentices near the mountain. He gave them 3 instructions. First, strike only after seeing. Second, pause when angry, because anger is a poor sculptor. Third, remember that the stone is not your enemy. It has its own nature. Your task is not to defeat it, but to meet it truthfully. When they asked about the statue on the ledge, he told them the story of the cloud and the storm. Though he never made himself wise in the telling, he said, "I thought I was carving a Buddha. The mountain was carving a human being." In near the end of his life, when walking became difficult, his apprentices carried him up to the ledge one last time. Mist moved across the valley. The statue sat with its lowered shoulder, calm and unhidden. Dalan reached out and touched the old crack beneath the carved robe. It was cool under his fingers. A cloud descended while he sat there. The valley disappeared. The path disappeared. The statue softened into whiteness. Dalan began to laugh quietly. "You again," he whispered. The apprentices thought he spoke to the cloud. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he spoke to change itself, arriving without apology as it always had. He closed his eyes and listened. No chisel in his hand, no plan in his mind, only breath, mist, stone, and the strange mercy of no longer needing the world to remain visible in order to trust it. Many winters after Dalan's passing, snow settled on the statue's lowered shoulder and made the crack invisible for a season. Pilgrims who came then saw only a white figure resting under pine branches, and some wondered why old people spoke so much about the storm mark. When spring arrived, meltwater revealed the line again, dark and shining. A young apprentice understood then that healing is not the same as permanent covering. Snow has its work, and thaw has its work. There are days when the heart is protected by quiet numbness, and other days when feeling returns with sharp brightness. Both can belong to the path. The mountain did not prefer one season over another. It allowed concealment, revelation, freezing, melting, and the slow return of moss along the stone. Tonight, you may feel like stone that has carried too much weather. You may feel unfinished, cracked, delayed, or changed by storms you did not invite. Let the mountain's teaching come gently. You do not have to hide every mark before you are worthy of peace. You do not have to become smooth before you can rest. Let firmness be here where it is needed. Let softness be here where it is wise. Let the cloud cover what the mind is too tired to solve. Let the crack become a fold in the robe, a line through which humility enters, a place where light learns a quieter path. As you lie down, imagine the mountain at night. The pines are still. The path is silver. The statue sits above the sleeping valley, not perfect, not untouched, but deeply at ease. It does not ask the storm to apologize. It does not ask the cloud to explain. It simply bows, and in bowing becomes vast. May your own heart bow like that, not in defeat, but in release. Not because life has been easy, but because you are allowed to stop fighting the shape of what has already happened. Rest now. The mountain is holding the night. The cloud is holding the mountain. And beneath every change, a quiet awareness is holding you.